All right, here's day 2 of our EOC review. Hopefully you have had some time to look at EOC review video 1, and you might be overwhelmed and wondering, okay, where do I find this information? I'm totally lost. I really need help. So this is my down and dirty 3 best links. The first is a textbook, and it looks like this. If you type in that web address, it'll take you to ushistory.org, and it's a textbook. We did use some of this for your lessons, so some of the text may look familiar. But if you are one of those people that likes to read it and highlight it and print it out, this is a great place. I keep saying one of the keys to U.S. history is to figure out what do you know and what do you not know. So as you're going through these videos, this review, you're going to come to places and be like, okay, yeah, I completely understand everything there is to know about the New England colonies. Okay? And you're like, I don't need to study that. Maybe go back through, read it, and make sure. But you feel like you have a pretty good understanding. Okay, well, then don't spend 2 hours studying that. You go to the middle colonies and you're like, oh man, I must have been sleeping through that lecture. You can come here, you can click on the middle colonies link, and it has information on the middle colonies, and then you can just spend some extra time on that specific section. So as you're doing your study guide, you put stars next to the chapters and the things, events, people, things that you need to go back and pull up, because in today's internet world, it's really easy to find brief information on what you don't know. And that way you're not spending loads of time reviewing stuff that you already do know. Videos. So if you are not a text person, but you like videos, this guy is really good. He's funny. And he has made short 7-8 minute videos on everything. This scrolls down. It's amazing. So for example, you're like, okay, I don't understand the House of Burgesses. Click on it. Watch a 5-minute video, get caught up. Hip Hughes, he's on YouTube. Absolutely amazing. I highly recommend watching some of these, even if you go through, you don't use it that way. I would just recommend just watching some of them. They're very good. The third link is the study guide that has been listed on your class course announcement page for the whole year. So if you didn't notice it, go to your desk, click on your class. On the right-hand side is your class announcements. Scroll down. You'll see this link. It is everything that you were supposed to know by the time you finish the class. Okay? You can go through, cross out the things that you know. You're like, oh yeah, I know all about Nixon. Cross him out. And then go through and say, okay, well, this is what's left. And then use the textbook, use the videos, all that. Use the lessons and everything in the course and find out the information that is missing. Okay? So we're going to go back. We're going to get started on our chapters. I think of it as in little, like a chapter of a book. Okay? And this chapter is titled Westward Expansion. We're going to build the nation, okay? So these are things that are taking place during the era of westward expansion. Even as we are expanding and getting bigger as a nation, we're already tearing ourselves apart. What are we tearing ourselves apart over? Slavery, okay? So these are two sort of competing forces in our chapter here of westward expansion. So in westward expansion is this idea of manifest destiny. Manifest destiny it has a religious component of God destined us to settle from the East Coast to the West Coast. We are a superior culture. We have better government. We have this amazing new constitution. We're democratic, and it is our God-given responsibility to spread this amazing culture. We have religion. Again, remember, we came and settled, especially in the New England colonies, for religious reasons. And so when we're expanding west, we're still taking that idea of we have a superior religion and we're going to continue that and push it west. Technology. We're coming into the age of the railroads and electricity. All of that is going to be sort of like a sign from God that we're meant to expand west. So manifest destiny is one thing pushing us west. We're going to define our borders, and that's going to be done by the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine basically looks at Europe and says, we're here, we're a country, leave us alone. Spain cannot come in and piggyback over us and start settling all this other territory and make colonies. Not going to happen. Stay out. America didn't have a very strong navy at the time, so we do actually start looking to Great Britain to help enforce this policy of not allowing other countries to create new colonies. And Great Britain was happy to do it because we gave them preference in trade. Okay, so the Monroe Doctrine is what it really officially sets our boundaries and tells Europe, stop coming over here, no new colonies. But what about the land that's already claimed, right? France claimed this whole area that we're going to get in the Louisiana Purchase, famously done by Thomas Jefferson for $15 million, which roughly equals like 2-3 cents an acre or something ridiculous. Napoleon was in a whole lot of debt. He wasn't interested in getting, going over there and trying to make something of the Wild Wild West. And so he's like, hey, you know what? Here you go. And Jefferson took advantage of it. That was huge. It doubled the size of the United States. One reason that we wanted this area was because we wanted the top and the bottom of the Mississippi River. Railroads are not a thing right now, and so rivers are. That's how we're transporting goods. That's how we're getting goods from the top of the country to the bottom, and we wanted to have access to that. So make sure that you know this map. There is going to be some geography questions on the end of course exam, so make sure you know some basic geography features. Where are the Rocky Mountains? Where's the Mississippi River? What oceans on the East Coast? What oceans on the West Coast? Things like that. What countries are beneath us? What country is above us? Just your basic geography. This map shows territory that's owned by different countries, right? So we know the Louisiana Purchase was bought from France. We're going to expand westward and get territory from Spain. And then up top on the left, that's the Oregon Territory. We actually go back to Britain because that's owned by the British. Okay, so make sure you have this map in your head as you work your way through the course. All right, so all is not peachy green and roses or whatever with Great Britain. We do have a War of 1812. The War of 1812 was mostly fought at sea because Britain was still sort of like not treating us as completely independent. They thought, so yeah, you won the war, but how rough and tough are you? And when there are sailors, if an American was on a ship, and then that ship got seized by Great Britain, they would take those American sailors and force them to serve in the British Navy. It's called impressment. And we tried to avoid war. They continued to do it. And eventually a second war erupted. Sometimes it's called the Second War for Independence because it was fought by Great Britain. Some of the battles were fought on land. This is when the Capitol was burned. The famous George Washington story where Dolly Madison runs back into the burning Capitol and seizes the portrait from keeping it from being burned. This is when the Star Spangled Banner was written. We're going to get our whole second crop of presidents out of the War of 1812. Of course, we win this again. Jackson. So let's talk about some of those presidents. The age of Jackson. Up until this time period, white males with property are the ones that are doing the voting. When Jackson runs for president, he wants to expand voting rights to more people because he believes that he is a man of the common people, that more people should be able to vote. So he expands the the voting pool. And if he's giving you the right to vote, who are you probably going to vote for? Jackson. So this is called Jacksonian democracy. Jacksonian democracy is for the common man. And, excuse me, it gives the right to vote to all white males, okay? Does not include slaves, does not include women. Something else you should remember about Andrew Jackson is, of course, the Indian Removal Act. As we're moving west, we're moving in, we're butting heads with the Native Americans. He issues the Indian Removal Act, which moves all Native Americans west of the Mississippi. They have to travel west of the Mississippi and live on what are called reservations. This is done during the winter, so a fourth of all Native Americans will die, and that's why it's called the Trail of Tears. There's a term that you might see, it's antebellum. Antebellum just means before the Civil War. Before the Civil War, you had a ton of compromises that dealt with slavery, and you need to be familiar with them. This is a second term, sectionalism. Sectionalism is this idea that as we expanded west, we did not do so uniformly and everybody's happy, that the nation was actually very, very divided. So sectionalism, if you ever see that term, means that division of the nation over slavery. So as we're moving west and we're acquiring this territory, new states are coming into the Union. The first way that we dealt with slavery was one free state, one slave state, one free state, one slave state, and that kept it equal. Why is this important? It's important because of Congress. Congress is made up of the House and made up of the Senate, and you learn all about that in the Great Compromise. They want it to be an equal number of slave states and an equal number of free states so that there's no unfair, the North getting preference or the South getting preference over slaves. And that worked out fine until you had 3 states that wanted to come in, or maybe just 1 state that wanted to come in. It threw off the balance in Congress. That was especially happened when we purchased Louisiana Territory. Suddenly you had Maine wanted to come in, and you had Missouri that wanted to come in. And what do? How do you keep the balance equal? So we drew a line. The Missouri Compromise line was a 3630 parallel. Anything above that line was going to be free. Anything below that line was going to be slave. Well, that worked out well for a while, okay? But didn't last forever. Then you're going to have the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Kansas-Nebraska Act is going to say that the people in Kansas and Nebraska can decide for themselves. It's called popular sovereignty, another term you need to know. Popular sovereignty is when the state is going to go and vote. Well, this is actually going to be the start of the actual first sort of fighting, because people in Kansas would flood into Nebraska to vote. They don't actually live in Nebraska, but they would cross over to vote, and this resulted in what was called Bloody Kansas. And there's actually shooting, and people died. You also need to know the Compromise of 1850. I don't have my notes all on that, so I'm going to actually just keep it moving and let you look that up, because there's a lot on the Compromise of 1850 in the study guide. I thought I had a whole slide on that, and I do not. Oh well. Okay, so make sure that you know those compromises. When the compromises fail, we're going to get the Civil War, right? There are major things that you need to know that lead directly to the fighting. First is the Dred Scott decision. Dred Scott decision was a Supreme Court case where a man is suing for his freedom. Dred Scott is suing for his freedom, and the Supreme Court, of course, gets it very, very wrong when they say Black people are not citizens, they cannot sue, and they are property, and so they can be taken anywhere. This immediately eliminates free states. And it's basically saying that a slave is property and can be taken into a free state. Okay, so that's a problem. Second thing it does is it eliminates the Missouri Compromise line, right? The 3630 parallel. Slavery can now exist everywhere, according to the Supreme Court in the Dred Scott decision. Make sure you know who abolitionists are. Abolitionists are the people who are staunchly against slavery. For whatever reasons, whether it be economic or religious, they are the ones who are fighting to end slavery. The Underground Railroad, that is when they try to get people out of the South via people's houses. They will take them from house to house to house until they can get them to the North where they can be free. But the two things that immediately precipitate the Civil War, of course, are the election of Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln is seen by the South as someone who is determined to eliminate slavery. And when he is elected, South Carolina secedes. Again, a vocabulary word that you want to underline. South Carolina leaves the Union with the election of Abraham Lincoln and the start of the Civil War. Your lessons do a very good job of this. I'm not going to go into every single one of these, but these are the battles that you need to know. I've gone through and picked them out. So if you don't know anything about these, make sure that you can at least say something about each one of these. The bombing of Fort Sumter, of course, that's the very first battle of the Civil War down in off the coast of South Carolina. Battle of Bull Run, Antietam, Gettysburg. You need to know what the Emancipation Proclamation was. It did not free all the slaves. Remember, it freed the slaves in the South, okay? It freed slaves in the Confederacy. Battle of Vicksburg, Sherman's March to the Sea. Please make sure you know who the leaders were on each side of the war. General Lee, he was the general for the South, and he's going to surrender to General Grant, who's the leader of the North, and they do that at Appomattox Courthouse. I have been pointing this out, but the big bold words at the top are sort of like our chapter titles, right? So Reconstruction. So now we've left the Civil War, the South has lost, and now we are faced with the challenge of rebuilding. So now we're in a period of what's called Reconstruction. How do we get the South back into the Union? You've got people who've just been shooting at each other. How do you get that country to come back together? You're going to have two plans. And you're going to have the Abraham Lincoln's plan, which was we need to do it quickly, okay? It was very lenient. With the South, it didn't punish them. It didn't say, you started this, you need to be punished. It said, we're going to work together. We're going to put everything behind us and really work to rebuild. Well, of course, Abraham Lincoln gets shot by John Wilkes Booth, and that plan sort of goes out the window. You need to know about, in Reconstruction, what happens to the freed slaves. There is a business, an organization that's going to work to help them. So you need to know about the Freedmen's Bureau, 40 Acres and a Mule, and all that stuff that they do. During this time period, you're going to have three very important amendments passed. You're going to have the 13th Amendment, which is going to give African Americans their freedom. It frees the slaves. The 14th Amendment, which gives them citizenship. It makes them a part of the country. And of course, with citizenship, what does that give you? It gives you the right to vote. So with the 15th Amendment, African Americans are given the right to vote. Again, keep in mind, this is not saying anything about gender, okay? This is strictly African American males. So Johnson was Lincoln's vice president. He's going to be very lenient on the South. He's going to let the South sort of go back to sort of what it looked like before the war, especially with sharecropping. He's going to let the South implement what are called black codes, which basically make African Americans second-class citizens. When they go to vote, there's penalties put on them. They can't, say, oh, well, if you can't read, you can't vote. And then they put fines on them. Oh, if you can't pay this, then you can't vote. There's going to be an emergence of the KKK. So make sure that you look at the Reconstruction period and understand, okay, well, what was presidential Reconstruction? When Johnson was in office, what did it look like? Well, then there's radical Reconstruction, which is, or congressional Reconstruction when Congress took over. And what does that look like for the African Americans? You need to be able to see how we got the South back into the Union and became a country again. That's what Reconstruction is about. After Reconstruction, the next chapter is the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age is when the United States is booming, okay? And it looks great on the outside. It looks like every American's walking around, it looks like America's just full of wealth. But it's gilded. Gilded means a thin layer of gold over a whole lot of cheapness. If you've ever seen statues that are gilded, it doesn't mean the entire statue is gold. It just means that it's coated in gold. Okay? I must have gotten really into this section. I have a lot of notes on my slide for this. This is going to be when we have the rise of big business. You're going to remember those captains of industry, Andrew Carnegie, Rockefeller, Morgan, taking advantage of oil and steel and big banking. So you have these men who are making millions and millions of dollars. We're going to have our first billion-dollar company, but the working conditions are poor, right? You're going to have people working 12, 13, 14-hour days, 6 days a week. There's no labor laws. Their children are working. Huge influx of immigrants. So if you say, you know what, I don't think I should have to work 12 hours straight, I can say, okay, great, you're fired. I'll pick up this guy. He takes your place. So really think about the idea of supply and demand, right? The demand for labor was there. Like we needed all these immigrants, but there was just so many immigrants coming in that they could be easily replaced. Rapid urbanization is going to be happening during this time period because of all the immigrants coming in. So there's overcrowded, poor sanitation, all that stuff. What did I skip? Oh, labor unions. So there was an attempt to organize labor. It failed. Okay? It wasn't ready yet. There's going to be several incidences that happen. There's going to be riots, and people are going to associate labor unions with socialism. So that did not work to sort of curb the massive corruption happening during this time period. During this time period, you're going to have what's called political machines. Political machines are a corrupt form of government. I was going to see if I had a picture of it, but I do not. Political machines is basically when you have a boss, and the boss goes into these immigrant communities, let's say like the Irish community, and he says, you know what, everyone in the Irish community is going to vote for me, and you must vote for me because I'm going to provide you with kickbacks. I'm going to make sure that you get the best jobs, and I'm going to make sure you get the best government contracts, okay? So that boss controls the Irish vote. So if somebody is running for office, that person goes to the boss, and the boss says, yeah, I can get you the Irish vote, but you got to give me the kickbacks. Okay? And so this leads to corruption, lots and lots of corruption, most famous being Boss Tweed of Tammany Hall. So we have big business, lots of corruption, so labor unions don't work. So how do we fix it? We have these civic-minded journalists called muckrakers. Jacob Reed, he took this photographer. He was exposing the living conditions of the poor and the Irish community, taking pictures especially of children and the poverty. A lot of his pictures show them working in mills, like small children pulling cotton in cotton mills. Ida Tarbell exposed corruption in oil. And it'll come to me. Somebody about the meatpacking industry. Upton Sinclair is going to write about the horrors of the meatpacking industry. So muckrakers are these journalists that are exposing the corruption through writing, and Jacob Reed through photography. So after the Gilded Age, we're going to talk about American imperialism. This is when America starts looking beyond its borders, and it shows how did we go from 13 colonies, westward expansion, to, okay, now we're outside our borders. We are in Hawaii and the Philippines and Alaska. So when did we do all of that? Before 1890, we were subscribing to George Washington's philosophy in his farewell address of isolationism. After 1890, we're going to start looking to foreign countries and getting involved in influencing other countries in imperialism. So 1890 is roughly that cutoff date. America had become so industrialized that we're beginning to look for new markets. We need new places to sell our stuff, and we also need more stuff to bring in, okay? This is where you get your I call them like the policies. You're going to have your open door policy. You're going to have your gunboat policy. You're going to have your dollar diplomacy. All of those policies come in to help America expand. So if you don't know what the open door policy is, and if you don't know what gunboat diplomacy is, and you don't know what dollar diplomacy is, please look those up. Let's talk about open door policy. Open door policy is we wanted access to China, okay? China is like the big jewel. It's what everybody wants. And Europe had sort of already divvied up China, and they would look to America and say, no, you can't trade here. And we went to China and said, hey, we want to trade with you. Can we have an open door? Please agree to let anybody who wants to trade with you in. And we start pushing that door open. So that idea of getting in with China, even though Europe is trying to close the door. We wanted an open door with China. Well, the people who live in China were getting more and more aggravated that they weren't in control of their country. They were being told who they could trade with by Europe, by America, and so there was a rebellion, and it's called the Boxer Rebellion, and the Boxers went through and started killing a lot of foreigners, especially American Christians, and America had to go in with soldiers and calm the rebellion. During this period, during American imperialism, we are going to get involved in Hawaii. We're going to work to overthrow, sort of instigate a coup and support the overthrowing of the Hawaiian queen. We have lots of sugar plantations in Hawaii, and so we wanted to protect that interest. We purchased Alaska from Russia. It's called Seward's Icebox. It was kind of controversial. But you see, we are now way beyond our borders, right? We're not just the contiguous U.S. Another part of sort of like a subchapter to American imperialism is the Spanish-American War. This is when we really start getting a lot of foreign activity. The Spanish-American War is interesting because we fought China, we fought Spain, but not in Spain, in Cuba. Okay? So Cuba, of course, is very close to the Florida border, and we had a lot of interest there. But Cuba was a Spanish colony, and Spain starts putting high taxes on Cuba, and huge humanitarian, just humanitarian atrocities. They were putting them in prisons, and lots of Cubans were dying, and they wanted to revolt. They did not want to be a Spanish colony. They wanted to be independent. Who do we know that fought a war for independence because of high taxes and tariffs and didn't want to be ruled by a different country? And America saw a huge interest and saw that we could help this country become independent. And it wouldn't hurt us if we could keep our interests okay and raw materials and new markets in Cuba. That might be good too. So humanitarian and economic reasons were out at work. By weird coincidence, the USS Maine was down in Cuba trying to keep things monitored. It blew up. Yellow journalism is sensational journalism where they take very little time to verify facts, okay? And they just want to sell newspapers as quickly as possible. So when the Maine blew up, they did not wait for investigators. They didn't wait to see what happened. They just proclaimed Spain blew up the Maine. And that was all it took to get us into a war, okay? So America gets involved supporting Cuba against Spain against the backdrop of the blowing up of the USS Maine. The Maine was later proven that it probably was not blown up by Spain, that it probably had something to do with gunpowder and fire. It was probably an accident. So what do we get out of the Spanish-American War? We get the Philippines, we get Puerto Rico, and we get Guam. So now we're really far invested. Oh, here's all those diplomacies I was talking about. The Roosevelt Corollary, dollar diplomacy, good neighbor policy, and the Panama Canal. These are all of the policies that you really need to know in depth for this section. It really shows us getting entangled with other countries. This is important because our next chapter is beginnings of World War I, and how the heck did we get involved in a European war? We went from George Washington saying, hey, don't get involved in European wars, to suddenly, okay, we're involved in all these little countries, and suddenly we're now going to get involved in World War I. So keep working on your study guide, and if you have any questions, as always, send me a teacher message.